Your Excellency, just I went to ask you this question earlier. When you were getting in contact with Bishop Dolan and maybe leaving the resistance, was there any doubt concerning the Thuc line bishops? Was there any of those concerns? Maybe there was some false things spread about the Thuc bishops. Was there anything like that in your mind when you were going through this process?
There was no doubt, because within the resistance, both Bishop Williamson and Bishop Thomas Aquinas, they knew very well that the Thuc lineage and the Thuc consecrations were valid. And especially Bishop Thomas Aquinas, when he was in France in the Bahu, he met Bishop Gerard de Laurier. He actually studied under him, even though he was a Benedictine. And he also met Bishop Thuc when he visited that monastery. And so all those bishops, they were well aware of the validity of the Thuc consecrations, and they knew Bishop Thuc, they knew Bishop Gerard de Laurier as well. So for Bishop de Silva, there was no doubt about the validity, because he was coming from an environment that widely accepted those consecrations as valid. And Bishop Castromayor also knew Bishop Gerard de Laurier and recommended him. For example, then Father Semborn, when he and the other 8, well, the 9 separated from the SSPX, they went to Brazil. Father Semborn went to Brazil asking for one of the 9 to be consecrated a bishop by Bishop Castromayor. And Bishop Castromayor said, well, I cannot take responsibility for those consecrations. However, I recommend Bishop Gerard de Laurier. And then Father Semborn said, well, in the United States, we have this doubt about the lineage, and we have a problem with it. And then Bishop Castromayor even said, well, if the Thuc consecrations are valid to Bishop Gerard de Laurier, someone of his caliber and someone who has his knowledge, they're also valid to me. And he recommended him, and that's how I think that's how Bishop Semborn ended up in that lineage as well. A little side and also a little known fact is that, for example, back in the 70s, there was no such thing as an organized sedevacantist movement. All those bishops, Bishop Thuc, Bishop Lefebvre, they were all just traditionalists, Bishop Castromayor, and they were all working together. And for example, it was one of the professors at Icon that actually suggested that Bishop Thuc would go to the Palmar, the Troya, and ordain and consecrate people there. And they were not conclavists at that time. They were just traditionalist priests and traditionalist faithful. And it was in that capacity that Bishop Thuc went there to make the first ordinations and consecrations. What happened with the conclavism that they later adopted was actually many years afterwards, after the death of Cardinal Montini, supposed Paul VI, and by then Bishop Clemente Dominguez proclaims himself to be Pope. But actually back then, back in those days, in the 70s, it was just a community, a huge community and very united of traditionalist bishops and priests and faithful. And Bishop Thuc, for example, was in the same position of Bishop Lefebvre back then, and Bishop Thuc, and that's why he actually writes after the not even conclave, but after the papacy at the Palmar happens, after Bishop Clemente Dominguez proclaims himself to be Pope. That's why he writes to the Vatican asking for forgiveness, because at that point, it's not because he was supposedly crazy or something, but because he was still thinking like Bishop Lefebvre thought. And actually, the moment that he becomes a sedevacantist, like proper sedevacantist, is a little afterwards, when he starts having contact with Dr. Hiller and Dr. Heller in Germany. And then the first properly sedevacantist consecration is that of Bishop Gerard de Laurier. Before, it was just a part of a wider traditionalist movement in which sedevacantism as a theological position had not still matured and became independent.